given that I was told 2 minutes, I thought PowerPoint. I stopped trying to do a PowerPoint.
Not required. I think it's a conversation only, yeah. But people who has a facility, you can upload the presentation onto the server, so you don't need to do screen sharing. That way it's easier on low bandwidth.
1645. Okay.
So, just clarification or probably. So, Angela will be like the initial releasing of the report. We will be giving 2 minutes to you and Guru to just give an overview of those two knowledge pieces. And then once we get into the panel discussion, it will be 10 minutes each for the first question. Then we'll open the floor for question and answer. And then again, when we move to recommendations, it will be 10 minutes each for all these.
Sorry, just one small confusion. I'm hearing echo. I think the YouTube thing is on. Maybe Anjela has put the YouTube on. Maybe we'll just put the YouTube off.
I don't have YouTube on.
Or Nupur, if you've got the YouTube on.
No, why?
Because I'm hearing an echo of the. Maybe. Yeah, it's me. No, it was me. I don't know. It was on yesterday. I tested it on. So since the YouTube was on, I was hearing the YouTube, say the same thing we are saying after 2 minutes. It was a little ghostly. Yeah. But no, sorry. Go ahead. You were saying something about the report. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that the first round will be 10 minutes each speakers. And then when we move to the second round of recommendations, that too will be 10 minutes each speakers. We can try to be little less in recommendation if possible, but if not, we can go up to 10 minutes per speaker. And between both question one and question two, we'll have an open session question and answer round with the people.
I'll make Nupur also as a moderator, so then you can start seeing the raise hands. If somebody does a raise hand, you'll be able to see that. Once again, I'll just make you moderator. I'll make all the panelists as moderators so they can see the. Has Binay dropped off? I think Binay has dropped off. I'm unable to see him on the call. He's joining again, yeah. Fine. Yeah, that's fine, Nupur. I heard you. And I'm fine by that. You will frame the question, and also I think some the initial remarks on the report also you are planning, right?
Yeah, initial remarks, that's what I was saying. For that, I would invite you and Angela, 2 minutes each to quickly just give an overview of the Edtech policy by Angela and IFI by Guru. Guru, I would request you to not cover too much because then Angela will be covering in detail in her.
Yeah. Just overview only. In fact, the whole call the whole webinar is about the report in a sense, about the ideas of the report. So the first thing is only a kind of a trailer to say what we will be talking about.
Yeah.
Binay, you dropped off. You had a connectivity issue.
Yeah, I had a connectivity issue.
We'll
Good morning,
wait for
all of
another
you.
2 minutes. Hi, morning.
I am Dilip from Kerala.
Hi, Dilip ji.
ಸರ್ ಕುಡಿಯಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ಬಾಟ್ಲಿ ನೀರು ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ ಸರ್ ಇಲ್ಲ ಇದ್ರೆ
So I would just request everyone to mute yourself and whoever the speaker is would unmute and talk. So I think we can start now because we already have people joining us. Is that okay, Guru? Shall we start? Yeah? Okay, cool. So, good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's webinar. As we know that the webinar is Edtech a danger to education, and we also understand that this is an appropriate time to discuss this issue. It has been here around for a while and probably needs much more focused discussion and much more focused plans to see how we engage with the issue and how do we take the advocacy forward in the coming year or coming year or two, whatever. So in terms of this webinar is being organized by Oxfam India in collaboration with our partners. Our partners in collaboration are IT for Change, of course, CETE, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and National Coalition for Education in an Emergency. So all of us together are organizing this webinar today, and I welcome all the participants who are also representing from these organizations to join this webinar. So, as I said, as the topic suggests, we'll be discussing about Edtech. We'll be looking at how Edtech has captured the space of education in the last few years, and we'll look at how it is impacting education, how it is impacting stakeholders in education, how it is impacting teachers, children, parents, and all. And we'll also look at the financial implications of Edtech in education. So today we have, of course, we'll be going for a panel discussion and then open sessions. In panel, we have three panelists today with us. First, let me welcome Anjela Taneja. She works with Oxfam International, and she's policy and advocacy lead on public services and inequality. Angela has also worked with Oxfam India before. She joined Oxfam International, and she used to lead the inequality and essential services team at Oxfam India. And Angela has also been one of the founding members of RT Forum. So welcome, Angela, for today's discussion. I would also like to introduce Professor Binay Pathak, who is Professor of Economics at Lalit Narayan Mithila University. He has good expertise on issues of financing, both in higher education and I understand school education as well. So a very warm welcome to you also, Professor Binay. And we would also like to I would also like to introduce Gurumurthy, who is the director of IT for Change. IT for Change does not need an introduction. Of course, all of us know IT for Change. And Guru has been working in this area for almost 3 decades, is what I understand. So we are very glad to have all three of you here for the discussion today. So before we move on to the panel discussion, I would also like to, because the objective was also to release 2 of Oxfam India's knowledge pieces. One is the Edtech policy brief that we had written a few months back. It was authored by Angela and co-authored. I also worked on the brief. So one that, and the other knowledge piece that Oxfam has worked on is called Digital Dollar Report. It's an IFI report on Edtech investments. So it was authored by Gurumurthy, and we are really pleased to have Guru here to talk a little more about it. So before we go into panel discussion, Anusha, may I please request you to share the link of both the reports in the chat so that people can refer to both the reports. And then I would like to request first Angela to quickly give an overview of the Edtech policy brief that we are releasing today. And then I would request Guru also to quickly in 2 minutes probably give an overview of the IFI report. Angela, over to you.
Sorry, technological challenges at the last moment. Connectivity is not just access to the internet, it is also access to electricity. So in a lot of ways, it's the other way around. We first, it would have made sense to have done the IFC report first, because in terms of how the brief got envisaged is fundamentally weak. One started by looking at the investments made by the International Financial Corporation, the World Bank's IFC, in the EdTech sector, but we quickly realized that the issues are wider and require a wider framing and a wider focus. Therefore, hence the policy brief. What the brief looks at is Oxfam being Oxfam are the inequality people. So therefore, largely from an inequality lens, looking at the status of educational technology in India right now. Where we are is India is the second largest market for e-learning in the world after the US. It's a lot of the if you look at the earnings, then EdTech startups secured almost 16 billion in venture capital funding in 2020, which is more than double of what it made in 2019. The EdTech sector has been growing with even before COVID, by some estimates, 51.2% of all traffic share has been accounted by 10 Edtech companies. And there's been a 30% increase in time spent on educational apps on smartphones since the lockdown. If one looks at specifics in terms of what the impact of EdTech has been from an educational inequality lens, there's 7 or 8 larger trends that the brief highlights. One is there is still an inadequate physical access to technology, especially for rural learners. Uh, Only 4% of rural households had a computer, and less than 15% households had an internet connection at the start of the pandemic. There are prohibitive costs of EdTech products. The average cost of the products is estimated to be roughly 20,000 per year, whereas in contrast, the income of the bottom 20% in India is 25,000, roughly 26,000 per year per capita. So therefore, by definition, one product is 70% of the household income for the poorest Indians. Unsurprisingly, therefore, EdTech is gearing towards the top quintile. uh, Not only are the poor excluded, but they're also less likely to be satisfied with the offerings provided. Again, research highlights that only 18% of poor and lower income middle class users were happy with EdTech products offered to them, whereas middle class and higher income households percentage was 31%. There are multiple divides. While all this is applicable probably to all learners, Dalits and Adivasis have had a particularly bad time. Again, research during the pandemic shows that 4% of SC/ST households said that they were able to study online. As a woman, would be critical to highlight that the digital divide is gendered. Only 29% of internet users in India are women. Persons with disability have their own set of challenges, and it's not just a question of identity, it is also a question of language, with materials largely being unavailable in, for example, Adivasi dialects and local languages. And even if materials are available, for example, Hindi does have materials, the users have reported that they are more likely to be poorly made and less likely to be used. And then there are larger issues which are applicable to probably to the entire sector, which is weak adherence to data privacy, child protection, other regulatory standards. They will talk about it in more detail during the course of the presentation. But at the heart of the problem in a lot of ways is the fact that there are fairly weak consumer protection. And at the heart of that is the fact that the customer acquisition cost of edtech companies in the K to 12 segment is approximately 10 to 60,000 per student. The elephant in the room is this is equivalent to what the government of India spends per student, which is roughly 10,000 per student in Bihar, or 60,000 in the better well-financed state of Himachal Pradesh. Therefore, it is unsurprising that companies therefore pressurize subsequently their salespeople, as well as try to wring the maximum profits to ensure that the return on investment is made. And unsurprisingly, and all of that one could have still bent one's mind around if one did not also at the same time have fundamental questions about quality of the offerings in terms of fundamentally, again, if you look at evidence, 88% of total capital inflow in EdTech has been for exam prep and online certification, which isn't the most useful thing from a pedagogical point of view. There are fundamental questions about the fact that there are no formal mechanisms to assess new technologies and new materials being introduced. And in a lot of critique has come from teachers who feel that they are inadequately consulted and involved in the introduction of technologies in classrooms, uh, largely because issues related to teacher training, capacity building, and also trust building have often are not undertaken while materials are introduced. Therefore, in conclusion, there are two sets uh, uh, of concerns to be addressed. There is the larger question of commercialization of education through the introduction of for-profit private actors through in terms of multi-billion-dollar companies entering into the education space at this point in time, and at the same time, the need for a more balanced, more rational view of which recognizes the broad limitations of the educational technology. Yes, it's good to have technology if it exists. It's essential to make best use of the tools that are available, but also recognize that it comes with limitations which are at times severe, and therefore bring back the ed in edtech. That's it.
Thank you, Angela. That was pretty crisp and clear. Yes, and we know that the inequalities are exacerbating because of these edtech companies, and we know that the lower quintiles are not being able to avail these facilities. We'll hear more in detail while we move to the panel discussion, but may I request Guru to quickly talk a little about the IFI report that you have authored. Guru?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Good morning, all my fellow panelists and Nupur, and happy to see many people in the Big Blue Button room today. We hope to have questions from all of you and comments from all of you later on also during the session. But before that, a very quick overview of what this report says. So Oxfam India, like Angela said, is very keenly exploring inequities in education. And there is a feeling that EdTech is perpetuating the inequities. And that's a paradox because on one hand, people say that EdTech will reduce inequity because it's available to everybody. A Byju's app can be accessible on even a small, smartphone, and therefore tech can actually eradicate inequality. But if you look at the reality of what is happening, there are several reasons why EdTech has become a prime reason for promoting inequality in education. And in this context, when a World Bank affiliate like IFC is actually actively funding EdTech businesses, it becomes an additional aggravation of the problem. Because World Bank and World Bank Group, their primary goal is they're not commercial entities by themselves. Their role is really to promote public welfare, to promote equity and universal education as a part of their education mandate. And in that sense, IFC's funding of EdTech entities in India, one of who is Byju's, and Byju's has been in the news a lot, we know, in the recent past. So this report really came from that. When we do the desk research, this report is purely desk research based, and it's very, very clear that IFC has not done due diligence in actually understanding who it should fund, who it should not fund, and just going by the investee companies' claims of increasing access or increasing equity is not good enough, particularly in the context of several malpractices of these companies. And we will talk a little bit later about why venture capital funding is a very key problem as far as financing is concerned, because venture capital forces companies like Byju's into doing hard sell of the products so that they're able to make the abnormal or the supernormal profits that their venture capital funders require of them. So in this context, it's a very problematic thing for a IFI to actually invest in a business which is venture capital funded. We'll also later on, the report talks about, and we will elaborate more on the why EdTech cannot be construed as education. And there are very, very strong academic pedagogical reasons by which we have to understand it's not that EdTech is not useful or cannot be useful, but conflating it with a proper education is a very, very problem thing. We will discuss about it more in this panel later on. The report also discusses that. And it highlights that in the sector, there is a great premium being placed on disruption. And Mark Zuckerberg, who is the founder of Facebook, now called Meta, his call to his employees was move fast and break things. If you are not breaking things, you are not moving fast enough. So this is a very, very chilling statement because whose things are broken? The things don't or Mark Zuckerberg, they are the things that belong to the already underprivileged, marginalized groups in society whose lives are being played around by so-called tech innovations, particularly in the education space, which is very, very important to make sure that the primary goals of education are not lost sight of. I'll end by saying that normally we think of what will serve the public very well, and we say if privatization can help serve the public, then that is something we should consider. But education is not merely a service to the public. Education is what creates the public. And Postman, one of the persons who's written a lot on technology, says that education is the process by which you are creating the public, which is the enlightened citizenry in India or any other country in the world. And the process of creating the public cannot be something that we will have disruptions which are unthought, which are ill-considered, and therefore can have great harm. The report also makes very clear specific recommendations to the government, to the IFIs, to civil society, and we will discuss that later on in the panel today, so I won't get into that. But the report just is around 30 pages or so, and I think it's a quick read, and I would urge all of you in this listening to this our conversations today to actually download a copy of the report and read it at your own leisure. Thank you so much, Nupur.
Thank you, Guru. Thank you. So just again, the links of both the knowledge pieces are in the chat box if you would like to download or if you want to have a quick look at it. Also, right now we won't be able to take questions. I can see some of the hands up, but I would request all of you to probably wait for one panel, the first chunk of the panel discussion to get over, and then we'll open the session. So how we are going to run, we are having two panel discussions. Of course, the first would be, I would request all the speakers to speak for 10 minutes each on the issue that we are talking about. And then we will open the floor for question and answers. You can speak to all the panelists. And then we'll move to the second part of the session where we'll spend more time into looking at the recommendations that we want to make to the various stakeholders. So thanks, Guru, once again. Let me now start with the first discussion for today. And I would like to start with Guru probably, and then we move to Anjela and Professor Binay. So Guru, like you were talking about, you were mentioning Baiju and the malpractices that we have been seeing around. I would want you to, give an overview and talk a little more in detail about what are the implications of the whole scenario on education, and especially looking from a public education point of view. So I would request Guru to go first and comment. Guru, you will have 10 minutes to respond to this, and
yeah, will do. Thank you so much. Since time is at a premium, I'll just get started right away. So one of the challenges we have in the EdTech space is, there is a huge discourse created that schools are not functioning, schools are not delivering, Indian school system is broken, we have too much rote memory learning, and we need to have more flexible learning. We need to have more individual attention given to learners, etc., etc. Some elements of these accusations are true. India does have a lot of focus on rote memory. In Indian schools, individual attention is very rarely given in most situations, particularly in the government school environment. At the same time, imagining that the solution for all this is to provide a device in the hands of the learner and providing content to the learner that is also hugely erroneous. So the first point I want to make is that while education technology can certainly provide opportunities for the learner and for the teacher to access resources, to update their own knowledge, to interact with one another and learn, that is certainly possible. We should not think that that is education. Education is far more complex. It's a holistic process where a bunch of people are sitting together together as a community, and there is a facilitator. The teacher is an adult facilitator who is challenging, provoking, engaging the students to stay motivated and continue learning on issues and topics. Learning is not the same thing as watching a YouTube video. Entertainment and education, many times we think they have a lot in common, but there's a lot not in common also, because education requires continuous engagement and the learner has to be motivated by the presence and the participation of the adult education system. I'll just make one more point. That was the education impact. I think some of these points maybe my co-panelists will also say, but very briefly I've spoken about the quota phenomena, which is the suicide capital of the world, of the country, and so far to put your child into a coaching environment, you have to send the child to quota. Byju's will bring quota to every home in the country. So we have to really think that the quota phenomena is going to reach every household. Already we are hearing of parents committing suicide, children committing suicide because they're unable to cope up with the new learning environment. The pressures of competitive education, the pressures of stratified education that the Byju's model brings in is going to enhance the suicide phenomena significantly. And this is a danger that we'll be facing. Angela mentioned data harvesting. This is a very, very huge threat because every day we hear news articles about how children are manipulated, how children are, through gaming, through online gambling, through different kinds of access to different kinds of materials. Young minds are vulnerable to being exploited, and putting devices in their hand and encouraging them to learn through tabs when actually a physical environment of learning would be much, much more healthier for them. The tab or the digital could be a accessory to be used as and when required by a teacher who is aware of what she is doing, not something you give as a primary method of learning to the students. So addiction is a very huge phenomena. We have seen in our interaction with parents across the country that parents' biggest worry is the addiction of the children to digital devices. And I think there should be studies in Andhra Pradesh which will look at how the children are using these tabs. It is a very naive belief on the part of the government that they're going to be consuming some videos of geography. The tabs are going to be used for various other purposes, although the government is claiming that the tabs are have security to prevent that. So addiction issues are usually challenging. I would like to stop here and want to listen to what my co-panelists have to say.
Thanks, Guru. That was much before time, actually. Thank you. And you raised really pertinent points, especially about the complexities of education. It can't be handled by technology, and we know that. And it's not just children, even for adults like us. I think learning from technology is very challenging unless there is a discussion where there are two people involved, where there's face-to-face discussions. It's really difficult to learn the way one should be learning it. I think I would next go to Angela. Angela has worked on IFIs not just in education but also in health. So she has a good understanding of how these investments are made and what the impacts of these investments are. Angela, I would like you to talk about IFIs and IFIs and its role in the whole market. And I would also like you to speak a little about the corporate practices and the profiteering that's happening in the whole, the profiteering dimensions of this game. So Angela, over to you.
So, in addition, obviously one is, as I said, one is critical to bring the ed into Edtech, which we have done through Guru's presentation. But it still remains, it's still critical to remember that education is supposed to be a not-for-profit sector. It's still critical to remember that education is a right. So therefore, the involvement while for-profit schools in India are supposed to be illegal, in line with a large number of standing Supreme Court orders, similar protections are not available for the edtech sector. And therefore, by default, the assumption seems to be that anything technology centered has to be done by technology companies, which by itself is a somewhat unfounded assumption. Uh, uh, Therefore, one part of the question, therefore, is should education ed tech be for profit? Secondly, however, when and that's where the IFI investment comes in. The where on one level it is fundamentally questionable whether you should have for profit. This sector should be for profit at all. The game changes when it becomes a sector of investment by venture capitalists. What does this mean? And in when we say, for example, IFC has invested in the edtech sector in India, there are two levels. There are two ways how it operates. One is the IFC, which is the World Bank's commercial lending arm, invests in a company. In this case, we're talking about Upgrad and Byju's substantially, directly invests in the company, as in buys, as in acquires a share, etc., with an expectation of profit. And at the same time, there are also either it's directly or the IFC invests in some kind of commercial fund, which then invests in companies. So therefore, there is a clear, anyone who invests in a company expects profit to be earned out of it. So therefore, uh, as Guru said earlier, it it changes the equation further and creates additional incentives to cut corners, cut costs, uh, to achieve scale. One may end up having one. The question is not me. What happens is one then cuts on essentials from an educational point of view. For example, one recognizes the substantial part of the population in India are, say, tribal language speakers, but it's difficult to achieve scale on tribal languages. Therefore, materials in tribal languages never appear, and therefore tribal children never get materials in their mother tongue. So therefore, I thought one should start with a bit of basics. And yes, as Guru is saying in the chat box, there are also obviously risks involved with this. So therefore, when we look at edtech sector in India, it is the second largest market of e-learning, hence the interest of venture capitalists. It received almost $4 billion of investment in 2021 from venture capitalists. It has a future valuation of 30 billion, which by the way is more than India's education budget. And therefore, it's critical to critically examine the status of the performance of IFIs. Two levels, there are two ways in which one can do that. One is what has been the performance of the companies against their own stated standards. Therefore, if we look at the performance against stated standards, therefore, Guru's report highlights four dimensions. One is fundamentally disclosures are inadequate. One doesn't really know while money has gone in, there is no reporting in terms of what have been achievements in terms of has access improved, has quality delivery of education, learning in some ways improved through objective third party publicly available data. The answer is no. There is no information about equity from either a social lens or an income lens. So therefore, what are the educational outcomes through the IFI investments is unknown. And there are no clear standards of assessing Edtech projects, given the fact that their own assessment standards for Edtech are have just come in, but are most of their investments have not been assessed across those newly being developed standards. Even while a lot, and therefore what gets disclosed is usually self-declared, which is the company says that learning has improved. They say that they have done some assessments. They say that they have attempted to ensure compliance with labor standards, but none of that information is in the public domain. What we see in the public domain is consumer complaints. What we see in the public domain is court orders asking for compliance with the law of the land. What we see is poor labor practice reports. What we see is bad behavior, and it is unclear how the IFC engages with this evidence and this information that's there to see for all. Indeed, today we understand that NCPCR is having a hearing with Byju's around some of the bad practices that they have with respect from a child protection point of view. And there is lack of transparency about investments through financial intermediaries. In terms of Byju's and Upgrad, we know there is a direct investment, and at least we get to know that Byju's and Upgrad have been invested in. When it is through third-party companies who make investments, we often don't even know where the money has gone. So therefore, there are those issues. The second part of it is, so therefore, in return of all this opaque, we know it is opaque, but what are the outcomes anyway? Guru has in a lot of ways made my life easier by talking about issues of access, equity, and inclusion, which are core educational concerns. But there are also other challenges which are related to corporate behavior. Yes, one ends up talking about Byju's and Upgrad because, to a lesser degree, Upgrad because, but then it's probably is not just about those companies. It's a function of the behavior of the sector. When you look at India, India is in terms of context, India is the second most cyber attacks affected country in the world. If you look at the evidence, the number of cyber crimes increased 572 times between 2018 and 21. Therefore, it is a growing problem. 37% of Indian parents in 2018 reported that children experience cyberbullying. Therefore, it is not a nice, safe place for children in terms of the context in which we operate. Therefore, any effort to promote technology and educational technology needs to take into consideration this context in which it operates. As I said quickly in my first opening round, fundamentally the cost of acquisition of the companies is so high by the companies is so high that it creates perverse incentives for bad behavior. Therefore, what kind of bad behavior? Uh, what appears to be a free service by Byju's is often ends up, and one says Byju's because one has looked at Byju's and not that it is in any way unique. Therefore, it appears that what they're offering is a free app, but this becomes a basis for harvesting data of consumers, and in this case, they're not just consumers, they're children. When often what appears to be a trial period ends up being to be actually a lock-in period, one ends up seeing that often there are hidden loans that need to be repaid with interest. Therefore, it is unsurprising that in a recent survey, 96% of parents wanted stronger regulation of the edtech sector, which is a reflection of the fact that corporate practices probably are not at the highest standard. Second part of it is labor and environment standards. Yes, there are issues with respect to the uh, there are issues in addition with respect to false and misleading advertising. We've all heard about White Hat Junior as an example of quite clearly false advertising. However, this is not, again, not unique. And it is given the absence of clear guidelines of how data once collected is used, it is not clear how information about students will be used going forward. Additionally, there is the question of the employees of the edtech companies who are, for all intents and purposes, in the role of teachers. If you look at what research seems to suggest is whereas across India, as per the RTE Act, every teacher has to be trained, qualified, supported and motivated, again to quote the SDGs. However, in this case, the evidence seems to suggest that the reliance is on pre-recorded scripts that are filmed. The effort is to ensure uniform content and pedagogy across lectures, which basically means that that critical element that's required for learning, which is the interface between the teacher and the taught, of the dialogue between the teacher and the student never happens, which makes it difficult for children to learn. At the same time, educators' physical experience, tone of voice, rapport building, appearance, etc., ends up being valued frequently more than their qualification, their experience with pedagogy, and therefore effectively ends up de-skilling labor and devaluing their role as teachers and pedagogues. And uh, in addition, while the other piece that's critical to note is a lot of staff, as we're again witnessing right now, is the fact that uh, there are uh, the push for meeting sales targets has an impact on staff, which includes has been shown to affect mental health. And given the fact that a lot of them were hired and are gig workers on short contracts, this is affecting their employment. There are by some estimate over a lakh of people who are employed by this sector. The numbers are significant. If we want to truly deliver education of quality, you need to have respect people who teach and respect people who deliver education. Lastly, I've taken too long. It's critical to look at the impact on the public education system because the two function together. The growth of companies that are for profit and often function in a public-private partnership arrangement with the government not only impacts the growth of that subsector, but also often negatively impacts the well-being of the public education system as a whole, which in some ways is a segue to Binay's contribution. That's it from me.
Thank you, Angela. And interesting to hear about IFIs. It's big money that the evaluation is, as you said, it's almost double the education budget of this country, which means the implications are going to be big. It's no small money. And of course, this paves way to Binayji's thoughts on this. Binayji, would you like to comment on the implications that it's going to have on financing of education in India? What are the debates around financing edtech in India? So, and I believe that you would also cover some part of the higher education while talking about financing edtech. So, Binayji, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nipur, and thank you for having me here. Thank you, Guru. Guru and Anjela have actually set the stage, so I have the liberty to draw from what they have already mentioned. What I have thought is what I want to share, I will be doing that in 4 broad points. One is macro picture, understanding the broadly what is happening in the economy and the education sector. Then coming on specific features from an economic point of view, which is looking at education as a product and cost of education, and then how education is being produced or delivered. What I mean when I say macro picture is, we all are aware, I'm just trying to bring it to the attention of everybody, is what is happening since the 90s is there is an effort of retreating of the government and creating a space for private providers in all sectors. And social sector, health and education, has been badly hit because of this. We all know this. And there are many things which has happened at broad level. If you see, there has been decrease in public funding of education sector at all levels. Though there were some exceptions when universities were being set up in the last government, then there was slight increase in the funding. But more or less, the funding has been going down. Then there is an effort to ask institutions to operate at minimum cost. And not only so, there are prescriptions so that these institutes start earning on themselves. So in this scenario, when cost is required to be going down, when institutions are struggling for funds, both school and higher education at all levels, how do people in general view education? That's also important. And it has already been discussed, but I just want to raise that what people are looking at education as a process in which, as Guru mentioned, it's knowledge which is required to be imparted. As Professor Prabhat Patnaik points out, that what happens in classroom is an activity of society when one generation imparts the knowledge to another generation. Or people look at education in terms of credentials, that they need a certain certificate or certain level of understanding to qualify for certain competition, maybe for IITs, maybe for UPSC or something else. Why these points are important? Because people's reaction to changes happening in economy and education policy and what is happening in these sectors are very much related. So we had a market, we already developed market for coaching and tuitions, which was earlier informal, then gradually becoming formal. What Edtech has done is at one part replacing or capturing those formalization of coaching or tuition, and then on the other hand entering into the credential part of the education system, where Edtech with the help of government is actually entering into first supporting the education sector, which is the recognized sector, and then gradually being partner in delivering these credentials. While this is a trend which can be observed worldwide, in India these have very serious implications given our societal structure, in which we have inequality, which is increasing due to increasing unemployment. Our growth story is not much happier these days. While putting these broad features, now let us come to specifics. How we see education, and when I see education, the cost of education, both from the supply side and the demand side becomes important. From the supply side, particularly higher education has been referred to as a sector which suffers from cost disease. By cost disease, economists mean that it is a sector where fixed cost and variable cost both are too high. If you have to provide quality education without compromising on quality, then the cost will remain high. So that's why this sector, after the work of Samuelson, has been referred, which is Samuelson study was in services, for example, where human capital is involved, for example, art. So delivering quality education at that level is also an art. It's not only imparting information. In some way, when we go for Edtech, we actually tend to confuse information as knowledge and education as information. So these high costs come from high fixed cost, which is on infrastructure, laboratories, library, these kind of things, and then variable cost comes from cost on who delivers education, teachers, who at all levels, be it school education or higher education, at all levels, they are highly trained individuals in their areas. So that's why the cost remains high. To answer this cost disease, technology was expected, even if when technology had not entered into the realm of education, it was in the literature that technology can solve this cost disease. It was there. When technology is expected to solve cost disease, the answer is technology can cut the variable cost. Technology can cut the variable cost means technology can cut the role of teacher. Now you don't need more number of teachers, you need few number of teachers. You can have a centralized system in which only few teachers will cater to a large number of students if it is a live class, or the lectures can be recorded, where you essentially convert services into goods. And while doing this, we actually change the very idea of education, very nature of education. Education as a market has always involved hierarchy. There have been institutions, we know which school is at which level. Wherever we live in our cities and in our surroundings, we have established, I would use this word, brand for schools and universities, and we tag these brands with certain understanding of quality that we have. But there are a large number of institutions which are average, and some are below average. So for these average or below average kind of institutions, there has been a scope for coaching, there has been a scope for tuition, and Edtech is gradually entering that area and collaborating with institutions which are above average, so that it can also establish itself as an entity which can produce quality education with partnership with those brands, and can replace the average or below average kind of institutions. So in a way, labor intensive sector which required a very trained human capital as teachers can be converted into a capital intensive sector where the focus is on technology and less requirement of teachers because of the inherent kind of service delivery. But then we have to look at the demand side. When students are supposed to access education, what is happening with them? And there have been reports, even World Bank recent study, which is called Education Watch 2022. These studies show that most of the cost of education is actually borne out by families themselves. This is most, when I say most, of more than 50% of cost that is borne out by families. Which kind of families are we talking about? These are families which are either well placed in society in terms of income and access to resources, or somehow managing with all the resources that they have, whatever resources at their disposal, maybe selling their lands, maybe compromising on other important things, but trying to provide education to their wards. So this is true for all levels from school education and higher education. So when these families are presented before a scenario when EdTech is replacing or trying to replace more number of institutions or is a new way of service delivery before them, the cost of access is again on them. Earlier their cost was on paying fees and access to education in terms of traveling distance, cost of living, books, etc., etc. These days the cost is the cost of buying devices, being updated in terms of with the update in terms of devices, the software and the compatibility it requires with other systems, and also paying fees, which might seem nominal at the end and at the beginning, but are quite substantial when it comes to earning credentials. So looking at cost, these perspectives, it seems the sector still remains where cost is very high. The only difference is for providing education using technology, the fixed cost element is very high, while variable cost is low, and is such a low that gradually the marginal cost of providing education might tend to zero, which gives a kind of monopolistic power to the. On the other hand, for who are trying to access education, for them the cost still remains high because they have to spend on devices, they have to be updated, and so not much changes from their side. While there is a possibility of tendency of monopolization of the sector. There might be, the existing institutions, some of them remain in which present before us a kind of monopolistic market at one end, and on the other pole we have some oligopolistic market. That means few institutions capturing a good proportion of market. So a kind of bipolar market before us if this sector remains unchallenged or unregulated. While doing this, we are also accepting or going through a phase where our understanding of education is changing. Guru has mentioned good points on this, and Anjela has also mentioned this. I would like to add one more point, is that education is an experience good. It's not a given kind of specifications what might be true for, when we have certain. You go to McDonald's and you have a burger, then there are some specifications that tick, 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 and you get. But for education, what happens? This is a process. One who is providing and one who is doing it, real-time experience actually might be different from the same person. The same teacher might have, provided it in some other way, and the same person is growing with his experience, his or her experience. And what students will get, they were not aware of, that what kind of education they actually get. Even if you enter into a big name, be it school or college or university, the actual quality of education is perceived when you go through the process and after you complete your education. So beforehand, it's very difficult to ascertain the quality of education that students will get. This is true for the traditional mode also, not only for technology. But when technology is involved, the information asymmetry, the degree and nature also changes. The kind of information asymmetry that the traditional kind of sector that we are aware of inherits, it passes that to the technology sector, and because of this large number of students trying to get education from very limited numbers, which the kind of education or the processes, and as it was discussed that these EdTech companies spend a lot on advertisement, spend a lot on acquiring customers. So in these processes, the kind of advertisement, the kind of information channels which are operated to gain students create the kind of adverse selection in the sense that only they know what kind of education is what they are going to do, while students are unaware of or to ascertain the kind of services that they will get. And in that situation, when there is an element of illicit or there is element of which is unethical, with the presence of these tendencies, the market also becomes prone to moral hazard. These are few points that I wanted to to the fore for everybody. As we move around, if I get another opportunity, we will discuss something more, and as questions come, thank you for this moment.
Thank you, Professor Binay. Of course, we'll have more opportunity to talk more about it. And the issues of financing are central to the whole debate. So definitely we'll talk more about it. You really raised important points regarding the whole looking at the analysis from a variable cost point of view. And I think it will give us a direction while we advocate towards, looking at from a financing point of view. But now I will not hold for longer because I see a lot of people had raised their hands. So let me open the floor for questions. Anusha, I'll need your help because I can see Harshita's hand raised. Harshita, let's start with you. You can also, if it is directed to some particular panelist, please name them and please go ahead with your question or comment, whatever you have. Harshita. Harshita, are you there?
Nupur, I think Harshita is okay. She's here. She's joined in listen-only mode, so that's why she's not able to speak.
Okay. So, Anusha, can you? Is there a way of letting her unmute?
Yeah. Yes, I will message her and let her know.
And okay. Meanwhile, should we take another hand if there's one? I can't see Anusha. Can you help me with this?
No, as of now, there are no other raised hands.
I had seen few hands earlier, but I think.
Yeah, I guess they lowered it, so.
Okay. So anyone from the audience, doesn't necessarily has to be a question, but your experience or some sharing that you would want to do. If there are teachers who would want to share their experience with this whole technology shift that we have seen in education, please unmute yourself.
Nupur, Professor Anil Sadgopal had given a comment on a mailing group which Anusha has put on the chat window. Can I just respond to it? In the meantime, if anybody wants to ask, they can ask, but I wanted to just elaborate on his. Yeah. So, Professor Anil Sadgopal, who is a part of the All India Forum for Right to Education, he's a part of that forum. He's been active in the RT implementation on right to education for several years now. So he's made an important comment that Edtech is not just an education issue, it is a larger political economy issue. And we need to protect education from Edtech. So I just wanted to respond to that by drawing a slightly larger perspective on what is happening. So I am from IT for Change, and IT for Change is in the entire phenomena, digital phenomena, impact on society and economy. We explore, understand that, and our vantage point is always the vantage point of equity and justice. So for us, can tech be used for equity and justice? Can the use of tech against justice be opposed? So we look at both aspects. So what is really happening in society today is a phenomena called platformization. And I'll give the example of an already established platform that will enable us to understand what is likely to happen in the edtech space also. We know about Ola and Uber. All of us are very familiar with that. So before Ola and Uber entered the scene, we used to go out onto the road and hail a auto rickshaw or a taxi and go to our destination. And whatever money we paid directly went to the driver of the vehicle. Ola and Uber came in, and as a part of acquiring the market, what did they first do? They gave incentives to the drivers so that the drivers got more than the fare they would have got if they engaged a passenger on the road. They gave discounts to the passengers so the passengers were paying lesser money than what they would have paid if they hailed a vehicle on the road. This process of giving money to both the driver, who is the producer of the service, and the passenger, who is the consumer of the service, the platform, the middle person, the middleman became powerful. So people stopped going to the road to hail a vehicle, and vehicles also started relying on a platform because it was convenient for them to get newer passengers without wasting their time. Once the platform becomes established, once Ola and Uber becomes established, then they are able to fleece both the driver as well as the passenger. So once they became established, first of all, how did they spend this money? They were venture capital funded. A normal business cannot make losses, but platforms invariably make losses because they are trying to acquire the market. Once they acquire the market, they are able to fleece the customers and the producers. And venture capital therefore enables this process to happen. Now we find in Bangalore, for example, that even if I have to take an auto for a kilometer, the minimum fare is 30 rupees in Bangalore, but Ola will charge a minimum of 100 rupees. So it doesn't matter. So 70 rupees excess over the normal fare is being charged by Ola. I find that invariably the platform fees they charge is around 25 to 30% of the entire amount, and this is nothing but daylight robbery. So what platforms do? Initially they acquire customers through predatory practices. Once they get established, they fleece the market. And this is what is going to happen in the case of a Edtech platform also, that initially Byju's is going to the government of Andhra Pradesh and saying, we'll give our content free. You can give the content free to all the children. But while the content is being given free, they will collect the data about the children, about the households, about everybody. Gradually, and also they will make the people believe that connecting to the app is actually education. The reliance on the teachers and the school system will reduce over a period of time, because you may be able to write a NIOS exam or a board exam simply by hearting content that Byju's has given you, and you think that the school system is redundant. So old habits, old practices die down, and the new environment is created where the platform calls all the shots. So we can see what Ola and Uber have done in the auto and the taxi hiring space. Similar thing is likely to happen in education. Education is far more dangerous because, as I said earlier, public transport is a service to the public. Public education is creating the public. So citizens will be formed which will be amenable to Byju's profit making, not in terms of the constitutional ideas. So this is what, therefore Professor Sadagopal also ends by saying that it is really a battle for fighting for the constitutional values. That is what the fight of the education system is. In a way, it's the fight against privatization is not a new fight. It's an old fight. Privatization of education is a phenomena which is several decades old. But EdTech enables the privatization to happen much more strongly and successfully, because by definition we think tech is private, and that itself is a huge problem. I'll talk about it when we talk about recommendations, why we do not need to visualize EdTech in the way Byju's is imagining it. There are other alternative visualization of EdTech which can be empowering, which can support the public system, but I'll come to that later. But I just wanted to say that we can see examples in front of us where oligopolies, monopolies have been created, like an Amazon and a Flipkart, or an Airbnb and Oyo. So typically a platform, there may be 2 to 3 or one seller, one platform, which is holding both the producer as well as the consumer hostage, and the producer becomes a gig worker without security, without basic working conditions being met. So both the producer and the consumer are at peril in a platform economy. This is what I wanted to elaborate in response to Professor Sadagopal's comment here. Thank you.
Just a quick one to add to what Guru had said, responding to the chat. The last sentence talks about recolonization of India. Just to add that given the growth of the Indian tech sector, including expansion of many of the corporates to other countries like Africa predominantly, one is also beginning to hear the first signals, the first of complaints from other continents about Indian edtech companies and their performance, and the role of India as a provider of substandard technology solutions to other parts of the world, which something one has not had to face until now. But India as a privatizer of education elsewhere is something that I've never had to listen to until now, but one is hearing it now. Therefore, it's a new risk, not just for India, it is also a risk for the world, given it's our companies that are doing it.
Yeah, may I add one point to that?
Yes, please, Vinay.
Yeah. While the points are very mentioned by Professor Sadgopal and Guru and Anjela, I would just want to add that uh, this is a long debate. What role government should play in economy and what role government should not. While the sectors government should not enter or what government should not do is a space for private providers. And this debate is as old as the discipline of economics itself, starting with the days of Adam Smith. So what we are seeing in the days of neoliberalism, the space for private thinking of state. So I'm not sure whether it's colonization, but I'm very much sure that it's takeover of the system or takeover of a state by private entities who handle capital or who are the owners of capital. So in a way, this is a tendency of dominance by the capital over everything, be it education or be it any other sector. That is what I wanted to add.
Can I come in? I'm sorry I was not able to ask my question earlier. There was an issue.
Yes,
I'm
Harshita.
Harshita. Can I come in?
Yes, Harshita, please go ahead.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. I've listened to Mr. Guru earlier while in my MA class in TIS, Hyderabad. So I'm very happy to attend this session. And I just have two very important questions. One of it is the fact that when we
Harshita.
Yeah, I think she went on mute. Harshita, could you please unmute and speak?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know why I was muted. Okay, so I have two questions, observations. One is that shadow education in higher education is usually understood and accepted as a positional good. The advocates of private good always like to put it as a positional good because then it is considered double rivalrous and double excludable. So then if we understand education, although we shouldn't at all ever understand education as a private good, but if in case we understand it as a private good, then is the use of edtech justified? One is this. The second question is, when we talk about the lens of colonization and post-colonial and new colonial frameworks, in such a case, we often forget that edtech is also a product of the kind of assessment system and education system we envision. So the reason edtech has also boomed is somewhere also not just the not presence or the lack of demand and supply and all this, but also the assessment system in the country. So then, but when we look at TIMSS, perils, or this sort of assessments, this comes from the West. But who are the top performers? The top performers are countries like Singapore, China, South Korea, Japan. So how do we then view this in the lens of new colonialism and post-colonialism in general? I hope it is not too much to answer, but I have these two most important questions.
Thanks, Harshita. Guru, would you want to go first?
Yeah, I will answer the first one. When you say education as a private good, I wanted to really understand better, because I think nowhere in the world we see education considered as a private good, because everywhere if education is a private good, it means everybody can get education as per their purchasing abilities. And if that were to be the case, then in every society, because there is inequality, we are looking at, let's say, a capitalist society, not necessarily a communist society, which may be, there or not there in today's world, but a society in which there is income and wealth inequality. If education is seen as a private good, then necessarily different strata of society would get education in different ways, which is what we see happening in India today. And that would necessarily lead to a more aggravation of income and wealth inequalities, because people who do not have good education are highly likely to get into jobs that are not well paying, that are less secure, etc., etc. So I was not very clear why you wanted to, because nowhere in the world people think that education is a private good. Even in capitalist societies, there is public funding and public investments. We might have private management of institutions, which is what we in India we have as aided institutions. That is different from thinking of education as a private good. So I don't think I've answered. I've only raised a kind of a counter question to your question. Yeah, that was what I wanted to say.
What I meant is that a lot of times the advocates of private tutoring or edtech or for higher education to be privatized or become private often take this argument that education is a positional good. So then what they say is, so a position, how I understand a positional good, it necessarily means adding the social aspect to a private good. So then they necessarily somewhere, they can't have a kind of, it will raise a kind of a scandal if you call education a private good. But then you can, mold it in a way that it's a positional good. So it's a different way of saying that it is necessarily private and it is double excludable and double rivalrous. So that's what I meant. I'm not in support of this, but that's just my consideration, that in that case also I find edtech problematic, because then it takes away the basic nature of education as an aim for social mobility and inclusion, and the same thing that you are saying. But then the advocates, when they make it sound as a positional good, whereas their necessary consideration is private good, as education as private good, then how do we view edtech in such a society? Is then institutions like Khan Academy, which say that we don't run on a profit model, do we accept institutions like Khan Academy because they say we're running on a it is not for profit? So, but I find that also problematic. I just wanted your and the panel's views on that.
Would anybody else in the panel like to go in before I respond?
Can I respond to Harshita?
Yes, please, Professor. Go ahead.
Yeah, Harshita, I understand your concern well. I would like to respond in two parts. First part is understanding of education and economics. I would like to mention two economists in this regard. One is Professor Shaumin Chattopadhyay, who has written extensively on it. And technically speaking, education is a quasi-public good. By quasi-public good, we mean it has features of both public and private good. When I say features of private good, this means that education also involves private investment and private return. What I mean is, when I study, I get degree, get job, I get benefits of it. So there are elements of private benefits associated with education, but it has all other features of public good, which is it involves externality. My education ends up me helping my family, my society, the kind of knowledge I produce, that becomes a public good. So the technical stand on education is a quasi-public good. To add to this, I would like to mention works by Simon Marginson, who says that it's government which makes any good public or private. What he means is, suppose let us take example of cake. Any government decides that all cakes produced in the country will be provided by government, it becomes a public good. Or if the government decides that cake is something that bakers would produce and sell, then cake becomes a private good. So he takes us to far ahead than what classification of public good were on basis of rivalry, externality, joint production, etc. So looking from that angle, Edtech companies, even if education where private education can be, if we happen to consider education as private good, even then the role of Edtech companies remains questionable. For example, return to my example of cake. If bakers are providing us with cake, the quality of cake, the way they treat us, whether we fall ill after consuming the cake, it remains questionable. So whatever be the nature of good, the service provider, it's not just the mere nature of the commodity that makes something justified or not. But in case of education, which involves externality and has lot of implications for society, definitely any service provider, be it tech companies, private providers, public providers, all remain very responsible, and they are responsible and accountable. That's what I wish to mention.
Thank you, Professor Binay. Angela, do you have any quick thoughts or insights on that?
Yes, it's a positional good as well. Yes, individuals benefit from good quality education. Yes, parents have aspirations for their children who they want to not only do their best but also better than their neighbors' kids. That's a reality. But the question is, while one understands human nature, what is the responsibility of the state? Is the responsibility of the state to promote competition and survival of the educational survival of the richest, or is the responsibility of the state to ensure equitable outcomes and the best use of the human resources that the country has? If it is the latter, then one recognizes it may have elements of oppositional good, but still pushes for it to be a public good, because it also is a public good and it is in the collective nature and in the long-term interest of the country to ensure that it is treated and supported as a public good, which means Edtech, yes, there may be individuals who may want more, but it is the responsibility of the state to ensure everyone receives educational inputs, which includes some possibly tech elements, which are equitable for everyone, because that's in the collective well-being of the nation. Back to you, Nupur.
Thanks, Angela. I see two more hands, but the time is limited. So can Mitra Ranjan and Priyank, can both of you be quick in your question? And before I move to Mitra Ranjan, there is also a comment by Sadakat. Sadakat, I think we'll be talking about what you're suggesting here in the next session, where we talk about recommendations. That I'm sure will be covered in the next discussion. So Mitra, please go ahead with your question.
थैंक्स नुपुर। सबसे मेरा कोई सवाल नहीं है। पहली बात तो ये कि इस बहुत फ्रूटफुल डिस्कशन में पार्टिसिपेट कर पाया, और तीनों वक्ताओं ने हमारे जो बातें रखी हैं अपने आप में मुकम्मल है। मैं सिर्फ एक बात उसमें ऐड करना चाहता हूं इस पूरे डिस्कशन में, कि ये एडटेक का उपयोग करना, इसका इस्तेमाल सीधे तौर पे अभी की जो हालात हैं उसमें सरकार की तरफ से अपने मूल जो उनके दायित्व हैं, उनकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज हैं, उनसे डाइवर्जन है। न केवल डाइवर्जन है, बल्कि आरटी एक्ट का जो इम्प्लीमेंटेशन का मुद्दा है, जो और उसके एक्सटेंशन का मुद्दा है, खास करके इम्प्लीमेंटेशन भी अभी 25.5% पे है नेशनल एवरेज, सब लोग जानते हैं। तो वैसे में जब आरटी एक्ट हमारा मौलिक अधिकार है, तो उसको पूरी तरह से ग्राउंड पे उतारने की तरफ मशक्कत होनी चाहिए, या एडटेक के द्वारा जैसा कि सरकार दावा कर रही है कि हम बहुत क्वालिटी एजुकेशन देंगे और सारे लोगों तक पहुंचेंगे और कम से कम रिसोर्सेज में पहुंचेंगे। इसके बारे में गुरुमूर्ति जी ने, एंजेला ने और विनय जी ने बहुत सारी बातें जो बताई वो अपने आप में पर्याप्त है, और खास करके फिर अनिल जी का जो कमेंट था, मैं उससे बिल्कुल इत्तेफाक रखता हूँ कि इस तरह के तमाम जो प्लेटफॉर्म्स हैं उनका इस्तेमाल सिर्फ और सिर्फ इस वजह से किया जा रहा है कि हमारे 80% जो बच्चे हैं वो औपचारिक शिक्षा से, फॉर्मल एजुकेशन का जो दायित्व है सरकार का, उससे वो बाहर कर दिया जाए और सरकार को कम से कम मशक्कत करनी पड़े। धीरे धीरे आरटी एक्ट का डाइल्यूशन तो हो ही रहा है। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण मुद्दा है कि आरटी एक्ट के दायरे में जब हम सोचते हैं और उसको जब हम इम्प्लीमेंट करने की बात करते हैं तो सवाल उस पे हमारे तरफ से भी होना चाहिए और सरकार को इस बात को ध्यान में रखना चाहिए, याद रखना चाहिए कि संसद में उसने इस बात के लिए कमिट किया था और ये सिर्फ अधिकार नहीं, मौलिक अधिकार है बच्चों का। तो उसको और बेहतर तरीके से कैसे करें, और अभी हम बच्चों के चाइल्ड के डिफिनीशन के लिए भी लड़ रहे हैं, 18 साल तक के बच्चों के लिए कैसे मौलिक अधिकार का किया जाए, ये सारी बात। तो मुझे लगता है कि इसमें और कोई मुझे ऐड करने जैसा नहीं है, लेकिन ये बातें इस दायरे में एडटेक को भी देखा जाए और उस पर सवाल खड़े किया जाए। शुक्रिया।
Thanks, Mitraji. Very important for all of us who are working on right to education. Thank you. Priyank, can I request you to write your question in the chat box because time thoda kam hai hamare paas. And now
वो ज़्यादा time लेगा. Can I be like real quick?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Priyank.
Sorry, but see, I have a very small and crisp question because I wanted clarity. We were discussing EdTech and somewhere there is on one hand a total negation of it, this thing that we should reject it completely, and we should probably say that it is not adding value which it should. And the other end is where we are seeing, or there's literature which tells us that there are parts of EdTech which can bring in equity and such that. So from that lens, I wanted to understand what is the the speaker's views on how do you incorporate EdTech, or do you really bring it in, even though if it is not in terms the way Byju's do it or the other companies do it, but does in terms of technology playing a role in equity? Is wanted to understand.
Nupur, I suggest we can take this as a part of the recommendation. It flows very nicely into that.
Correct. This will flow very nicely into our second part of this discussion, and I think also all of you must have read comments by Sadakat and people commenting on Sadakat. So I would request all the panelists to have a look at that once, and let's move to the recommendation part. Let's also keep in mind that while we are recommending, can we also think of some alternate that we are offering here? Because yes, as an advocacy person, I do think that we need to have an alternate while we are rejecting an idea that makes our advocacy more stronger. So let me once again go, and I'm sorry earlier I had said that I'll be giving 10 minutes, but certainly we are not left with that kind of time. So can we start with probably 3-4 minutes each of recommendations? Angela, do you want to go first?
So therefore, in a lot of ways, going back to the discussion that's going on, no, we are not saying reject technology outright. Technology is a tool. Let's use it to the best way possible. Yes, if they, therefore, it's critical to make sure that, as I said in the end of my closing remarks, fundamentally one has to have a balanced view of recognizing its strengths and recognizing its limitations. Therefore, there are ways to address each of the concerns. If the concern is about, say, teachers not being, because that seems to be the topic under consideration in the chat box, if the concern is about teachers not being involved, yes, it's critical to involve teachers, and there are good experiences, maybe small scale rather than large scale, of how this can be done. So therefore, one should not throw away the baby with the bathwater is where I'm coming from. What we need, and since we are badly out of time, one suggestion would be to read the policy brief in since each of the points deliberately the brief was written with a view of, if there is a problem, each problem has a solution. If there is a problem of equity, then what needs to be done to address equity? If teachers are not involved traditionally, what are the ways to address it, etc. So therefore, however, since we're so terribly out of time, what we need is a holistic edtech policy. Because my recommendation broadly are on two levels. One is for the government, the other is for the IFC. As far as the government is concerned, we need a holistic edtech policy that analyzes the benefits as well as the drawbacks of edtech in education, and find and recommend solutions to the problems that we all recognize and know are fundamentally have solutions. Secondly, this require a justiciable framework that is legal in character rather than just expecting self-regulation by edtech companies. And if there are fraudulent practices, if educational standards are not met, if things go wrong, there have to be some punitive measures in place. Thirdly, there needs to be a grievance redressal mechanism where the government puts in place some mechanism where parents, when they are unhappy, when they find that they are being fleeced, when they find that the product that they spend their money on is actually not improving learning, there have to be mechanisms where parents can go and complain. So therefore, grievance redress mechanisms are critical. And it is critical to remember that tech solutions are not always the right answers. Even when there are pandemics, governments can consider do and no tech solutions, because that's not the only way forward. As far as IFC is concerned, if it was up to me, I would have said, let's not invest in edtech, because education has to be free and not for profit. But at the very least, be more rigorous in assessing proposals and ensure that the program design is robust, uh, have some standards of evaluating edtech projects, at least from a pedagogic point of view, from an equity point of view, from a quality point of view, from experiences of parents point of view. Ensure that the environment and social risk monitoring and also engages with the complaints and the clamoring of parents' voices and the court cases that are going on. If there's a large number of court cases against a company, that might be a sign that this may not be the best quote unquote investment from a development point of view. If even if one doesn't, if one says one doesn't go as far as saying don't invest blanket, certainly don't invest through intermediaries where the and other venture funds, so where the primary focus of the investment is profit, because children of India and children of the world deserve better than that.
Thanks, Angela. Professor Binay, I would like to move to you next.
Yeah, I would like to mention recommendations in 3 brief points. One is involving stakeholders. And when I'm involving stakeholders, I mean that, see, technology is not something that is exogenous. It is part of our lives. If not in other sectors, we are actually grappling with technology. We are adapting, we are evolving in use of technology in all of the sectors in our day-to-day life. When we go to bank, any other service that we are accessing. So inevitably, education. The solution is involving all stakeholders, understanding their concerns, give them time to evolve. So the second point that I want to stress is we need to be slow. We need to allow people to have time to adapt and evolve. it cannot be that to serve the interest of some particular section that they want their benefits or their returns very quickly. So things go haywire. Definitely teachers, students, parents, we all need our time to learn things, to adapt and to evolve with technology. And while doing all these, when the market is not perfect, and no market is perfect that way, so there need to be regulations in place. When something goes wrong and is going wrong, then which are the agencies which can look into? As Anjela mentioned, there should be some redressal that with the kind of regulatory system that is required. Maybe some specific agency to look into it, or as new education policy is proposing, combined agencies at higher education level, there can be some agency within those structures, or a separate kind of agency which look at Edtech or the use, which might work as an agency to promote to regulate it. So that my suggestion.
Thanks, Professor Binay. Guru, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So very quickly, because we are running out of time, I think I keep telling people my NGO's name is IT for Change. It is not no IT for Change. So obviously we believe that IT can make change possible, change of the kind that we want. Now what is that change? Therefore, a lot depends on the design of EdTech. EdTech by itself is not the problem. Obviously the people who are using EdTech, for what purpose they're using EdTech, how they're using EdTech, with who they're using EdTech, these are the considerations that we must have. So there are really two simple reasons to make EdTech meaningful, useful for society. And I'm not talking theory. In India, we have a practical model at a state level. It's not in a school level or a bunch of schools or one district. But I have been seeing Kerala state government for the last 20 years. 2002, they started an EdTech model which is different from the rest of the country. And I would say without hesitation that Kerala has a successful EdTech model that is available for the entire country to use. So what are the principles of the model? First principle of the model is it should be publicly owned. Now, all of us in this group, or many of us in this group, will swear that education should be publicly funded and publicly owned. And tech is even more important because a private school owner or a private set of schools will only mess up that set of schools, but private EdTech will mess up the entire system itself. So private EdTech makes private far, far more dangerous than non-tech private. I hope I'm making myself clear. In the tech sector, privatization is far more dangerous than it is outside the tech sector because the data collection, the data harvesting, the manipulation of people, the psychological manipulation of society is very much possible through tech. And education is a space where that kind of manipulation is highly dangerous. So BYJU'S is dangerous not simply because they will teach something stupid or wrong, but they will willy-nilly, because of their profit requirements, actually manipulate society, manipulate children, which is manipulating the future of society. Therefore, privatization is absolutely no-no in the case of EdTech. And Angela, therefore, IFC should not fund any business. It should not even be that we give them any leeway in that matter. Kerala has shown that public ownership of technology actually works. So that's the first principle. And the public technology is what is called the free and open source model. One thing which we forget a lot, which is mentioned in the slide in the bottom, is why tech companies are so profitable, because digital products by definition, the marginal cost of production is nil. Once I make a resource, I make a nice video, when I share it with other people, I don't incur additional cost. I mean, the marginal cost is very, very negligible. So if a public system can create adequate, what BYJU'S has created is not something that only BYJU'S can create in terms of content. It can be done by a state government like Kerala has done. It can be done by private but non-profit like a Khan Academy has done. So I want to distinguish between philanthropy like a Khan Academy, or a private non-profit like a Khan Academy, or a private non-profit like an IT for Change, or a CET, TISS, vis-a-vis a BYJU'S. So once you make an educational resource, a digital resource, which can be a software or resource, it's available for everybody. And once you make it open source, there is no reason to constrain it. The second and the more important pedagogical, I won't say more important, equally important pedagogical design principle is that we make a huge mistake when we give technology directly to children, because children are not yet self-learners. The purpose of schooling is to make children self-learners, self-directed learners. The process of making them self-directed learners requires a teacher. So I would simply say that the technology effort, Edtech should focus on the teacher and forget the children. Let the teacher figure out how the technology should treat the children. You teach the teacher to use technology, not only to use technology, but to become a critical user of technology. The teacher should also learn when to use technology, when not to use technology, when is a video meaningful, when is it not, what kind of technology should I use. If the teacher's abilities are built and the entire system were focusing only on teacher development, the teacher is the best person to figure out for her classroom what technology should be used, because it is contextual. Learning is contextual. Learning is not decontextualized, something that can come from one Byju's or one Pearson or one whoever sitting somewhere in the world. So if we follow these two principles, and Kerala has followed these principles, I'll welcome every Indian government. For some strange reason, we don't see Kerala as a role model, and Kerala itself doesn't go and advertise itself to the rest of the country. Every single government, including the Andhra Pradesh government, should actually make a visit to Kerala and figure out how Kerala has used technology for actually making learning, education far more meaningful than without the use of technology. So the answers are with us. It's a political economic question. Byju's can buy election bonds, right? And any other private company can buy election bonds and influence whoever has to be influenced. The Kerala government is not going to buy election bonds and influence other governments. So it's really a political economic question that is in front of us. And for that, a large-scale advocacy and awareness building is the answer. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Guru. I would take a few suggestions from the audience as well. Akshay, do you want to go first? I think you were mentioning that you would like to. Anyone else? Okay, I think probably Akshay is not here. He had messaged that he would like to ask, but it's okay. Probably he can join later and ask. So yeah, thanks to all three of you. I think very important recommendations that come from all of you. And especially Guru, you talked about Kerala model. I myself didn't know of that. So interesting, and we can look at it from an advocacy perspective also, how we already have a model that can be, replicated throughout the country. Very, Angela, I think because I have seen the Edtech policy brief, so I know what recommendations it makes, but it would be really interesting for everyone in the audience to please once go through it, because it, as she was mentioning, it makes recommendations on all the aspects, be it data protection, be it equity, or all the different aspects. So it's not, and what I hear from all the panelists is none of them really reject use of Edtech, but it definitely needs to be looked in from an equity framework, and how it can be, it has to be a public good and not for profit. So yes, with that, do I have any comment in the chat box? No, not. I think Guru has been responding to all of it. So with this, we are left with 10 more minutes. So I would want to spend few minutes on discussing what our advocacy plans for the coming year should be. What should we focus on? I think one common thing that I could thread from all three of you is that we need a regulation, we need a law in the country which is punitive if it is not abided by. So yes, let's probably take it as a starting point, and I would like to hear probably in a minute and a half from each one of you as to what do you think should the advocacy agenda look like, and if there are stakeholders you think that we should be targeting towards in our advocacy, please talk about it. And at the same time, I would also request, because this discussion around advocacy makes more sense if everyone participates and everyone comes up with some idea. It would be nice to hear from, I know there are teachers who have faced issues in school. I would also request all the people who are writing in chat to give, share their ideas around what should our advocacy plan be in the coming year. So let me start with Professor Binay this time and then move to Anjela and Guru. Professor Binay, are you here? It looks like he's dropped out. Anusha, has Professor Binay dropped out?
No, his audio is not connected. Maybe he's trying to join back.
Okay.
I will check with him.
Okay, then probably, Guru, do you want to start with it?
Yeah, I put in the chat also. I think this is, I feel that this is a long haul issue. Why? Because, and this we have seen across sectors, technology is very good and very good for all of us, right? All of us use mobile phones, all of us use Google search. Nobody will say we don't want Google search. Nobody will say I don't want navigation when I go on the road. So technology is very, very useful. It fulfills a lot of our needs. And because of that, unfortunately, because society it's happened during the same period when neoliberal economic thinking has been very dominant. So we all of us have sort of brainwashed into thinking that tech can only be provided by business or by the private sector. Governments don't at all have a role in tech provision. That is not entirely true. And also the government, what I think we need to advocate is the governments and the free software communities and the open education resource communities have to come together to provide an alternate model that can work very well to the proprietary private model. But this requires a long-term education of society. I think it's not a short-term victory that we just persuade Andhra Pradesh government to roll back, but helping people understand that alternate edtech models are possible. TSS has been doing that for the past several years through the CLICS program. IT for Change has been doing that. So how do we make these models, like Kerala you said you have not heard of, so how do we make sure that all bureaucrats, political parties, parents, teacher associations are hearing about public funded, public tech models that are working for everybody and not only for some of us. So I think that's what we really need to do. And in that, we look forward to support and collaboration from all the individuals and associations, in organizations that are part of this particular talk.
Thank you, Guru. Professor Binay, or do you want to go after what is comfortable for you?
I will go later.
You want to go later. Anjela, please.
If you're talking about advocacy, basically, in other words, where we are at is, we've had this conversation, now what? If one sees that there is a problem with the way this sector functions and it has to be fixed by some intervention of the state, it means engagement with the state in some way to push for some kind of change, be it in change in the policy/legal framework so that there are teeth to the recommendation, which are in some way binding, and in some way there are consequences if those provisions are violated. Or it is about change in practice, and don't get me wrong, while one is a rights-based advocate, changes in practice probably is where a lot of is where change will actually happen. This requires some mode of engagement with the administration/the government, be it at the national level or at state level. Or if it is about a legally binding framework, then it is with legislators, which are basically, if it is a national framework, it is MPs, otherwise it's MLAs. So therefore, what we probably need is a process of engagement with the government. How does that happen? One is the fact that there is knowledge and there is experience and there are policy recommendations, but we've had policy recommendations in the past. What we need is a community of people that pushes for change. So therefore, in some ways, this is a start of having teachers, practitioners, and citizens at large coming together to push for change. So therefore, what we need, therefore, is A, recommendations, B, an conscious effort to bring together voices of people who who would be consistently following and engaging with the decision makers on these issues. The voices need to be amplified, which requires engagement with the media, which means stream as well as social. But while one does all that, as Guru is saying, we still need model building, because alternatives showing the government that there are truly we're not misunderstood as being anti-technology, as if one goes with only with a critique of the reality as it is, one ends up being misinterpreted as just naysayers and Luddites who just oppose technology and want to go back to the Stone Age. And at the same time, uh, uh, one has to have some practical experience of what one is pushing for. So therefore, model building is critical, but at this point, and especially at a time when there is some degree of traction, it would be critical to have that process of engagement with the government, because there is media traction, because there is policy traction with, as I said today, NCPCR is having grilling by Jews. So therefore, there are critical moments when advocacy can succeed, and it still is one of those moments when one can have some hope for success. So therefore, that would be my recommendation. करना है तो अभी करें, नहीं तो it will be too late. Binay ji, over to you.
Yeah, I would like to add one or 2 points to what Guru and Anjela suggested. One is we are in the age of populism, where public demand or demand for public policy becomes very important. So while we are looking at all kinds of stakeholders, it's also necessary to make people aware, those to demand what kind of policies they want, and this applies to education in general and Edtech in particular. So people should be made aware that this is their right to ask for more and more role of government in education sector, using all kinds of instances what is happening around us, be it merger of schools or closure of schools, less and less recruitment of teachers. So people should be made aware of all these things, how these things imply poor quality education, why people should ask for good quality education, not only education, good quality education, not mere school building, but a good quality education with all kinds of infrastructure, teachers required. And in that way, Edtech becomes a point when people will be aware of quality that they want from use of technology. They will be able to understand the nitty-gritties involved, school system or the universities does, what technology can add to it. Unless people are aware of these nitty-gritties, they won't be able to put forward their demand, their concerns. And in this age of populism, if people are not aware, if they don't come forward, it's very difficult to advocate for changes, for policy recommendations. And second part is, while making people aware of their needs or making demand for public policy for education and Edtech, it's also required to push for more and more role of government in all sectors, particularly in education. Why I think so is, when the policy is creating a space for private, creating a space for profit seeking, then that gradually enters into social sector as well. So the broader idea that there is a need for government in all walks of economy and particularly in social sector, then that actually hinders the broader gateway where private players in form of Edtech or in form of any kind of service that they wish to provide, they enter into social sector or the sector which are very crucial for our sustenance. So these kind of movements involving all kinds of stakeholders, intellectuals, civil society groups, teachers, students need to be built up. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Professor Binay. So I think we are almost done with the time that we had committed that we'll close in. I would just take a minute or two to wind up, and also would like to slightly comment on our next steps, because we have kind of dealt with the issues that we are facing. Yes, there are issues of financing, there are issues of equity, and we have seen it in data as well as in our real lives. We have seen it through stories. We do have recommendations to make. We need a law. We need a law which is from the framework of equity, looking at education as a public good. What to me is important now is how we come together, as Angela I think was mentioning, about building this community which can raise the demands together. Because we are working in our own spaces, we are being impacted by whatever is happening, but it is very important now to bring all the voices together and advocate for what we are demanding, the recommendations that we have made. So yes, community building, in fact, I was happy to see good participation in this webinar today. It almost touched 95 people. So a great start if we can come together again and see what responsibilities can some of us take, and all of us take actually, to take this advocacy further. Some of the important points which I think also needs to be explored is how much are we talking about it in media, because yes, it's not that there are no mentions, but it would be important for people like us to keep writing in media and keep raising the issues there. Very important to engage with parliamentarians, and both MLAs, because education is we know is in the conference list, so it's a matter for both government of India as well as the state governments to take. So it would be great to engage, for this community to come together and engage at state level and national level to demand for a law which has all the recommendations being taken care of, which we are talking about here today. Critic awareness, Binayji has already pointed out, so let me not go back to that again. And of all the things, central idea is also to go to the government or go to the public with an alternate, which Guru has been talking about. So Guru, probably you would be the right person to take it forward, come up with some documentation on the models that we have. And here in terms of documentation, I would also like to just mention Akshay's comment, because he could not, he is looking after the YouTube so he couldn't comment, but he has written that we also need to document it in terms of a public hearing or in terms of stories, and use those documents and when we are going ahead for our advocacy. So yeah, those are the closing comment. I would not like to call it as a closing comment, but I think we should next time meet and have a more detailed plan on what our next steps should be. Guru, you want to? I see you want to.
Yeah. One last thing, I'll request Anusha, just a Telegram invite of that group. Can you put on the chat? And also in the banner, the poster that we put out, we had a link. The tinyurl.com/edtech webinar and today's date 23/12. That's a web page that will have further information on the group, the Telegram group we can be a part of, and continuing the engagement. So we all attended a event, but how to make it longer than that web page has the information. So I'll request Anusha to just share the web link as well as the Telegram invite on that. And Telegram invite we can put on the web page also. Yeah, thank you.
So as a first step, please, all of us, let's join this group and continue our discussion there. And we will soon come back again with some discussion on taking forward the advocacy on this important issue. So thank you all the panelists, and thank you so much for taking up time. I know all of you are very busy, but this is something really important. So we have to once again come together and keep coming together and take this issue forward. Thank you, Anjela. Thank you. I don't know if Anjela is in India or she has taken the call from some other country. She has been traveling so much. But thanks, Anjela, for adjusting. Thanks, Guru. You have really helped in even conceptualizing the whole discussion. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Professor Binay. It's always a pleasure to have an academician who could, give a different perspective to the debates and add value to the entire discussion. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to Akshay and Anusha especially for making this possible because, it's too technical for people like me to deal with. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, IT for Change team, and thanks to all our partners, the ones that we have collaborated with, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, National Coalition for Education and Emergency, and EdTech for Change, and Oxfam India. So thank you, everyone, and have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you, everybody, and we'll be in touch and we'll take this forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Guru. Bye.